Hello, everyone. We're very happy to have Jason as a guest speaker. Jason is a member of the sociology department and has specifically been looking at self-descriptions in Twitter and has amassed a very large corpus, which is a good thing because getting at Twitter, now X data, has become more difficult, and has been using this as a basis for very interesting studies. And I actually always use Jason's work as as an example in my Linguistics 120 course, which is language technology, to show why natural language processing is important for other fields in the social sciences and sociology in particular, to make use of a large amount of data. And I show some of the examples he's shown over the years, and I think people get why NLP is useful for such studies, because you just end up with a huge amount of data. So thank you, Jason, for doing this work, and I look forward to your talk.
All right, thanks. That's the first time I've been introduced by kind of the voice of God, or Owen Rambo, as we call him. So I'm going to talk to you today about my book. Copies of it right here. They're free for you. Take one as you leave. My book is all about the title, introducing this idea of Ipseology, a new way to study cells, human cells. Now, if you read my CV, you'll see this is perfectly in keeping with the research question that has driven me since I was a little boy, and is evident the founding, organizing research question that I always ask, which is, people, what's up with them? So this is my latest attempt. This book, I finished this book in Germany, not this previous fall, but the fall before that. And it's my latest attempt to answer that question. People, what's up with them? I've always wanted to know, and I've always wondered. So I want to study human cells, individuals, people, in the context of everything that's going on around them. The strong ties in their life and their bigger societies that they fit into. So that's what I want to study. People sometimes react poorly when I say I study that with Twitter bios. But let me make the case to you today that you can learn a lot from Twitter bios, especially if you have millions of Twitter bios extending through time, across space, globally, and continue. Consistent, persistent measurement. This is what I think the world needs more of. Consistent, persistent measurement. Let me just take you back to the cover. I'm going to give credit to Dolly. Dolly created my book cover. Made Dolly read the book, and I said, make a cover for this book, and this was its first attempt. First shot, and I think it nailed it. Put a bunch of globes here because there's a chapter on doing this stuff globally. And I got the main idea centrally, right? Taking whole and complete human cells and decomposing them into digital artifacts that we can study. All right, so what is Ipseology? Ipseology is a word that I made. And it's the study of ipseity. It is a word that I didn't make up. It's a word that's not used very often. Philosophers use this word. Ipse, the Latin root, means self or itself. And so ipseity is kind of the state of being a self. And I want to study that thing. So more concretely, I've contributed this meaning to the word. That ipseity means selfhood, individuality. This is going to be important. The essential elements of identity. That identity can be composed of elements, and we're going to study those things. How often they occur, how do they co-occur, how is their rate changing over time? I'll show you a lot of data on that. So I want to study ipseity, and like I want to do everything, I want to do it at scale. Across time, across space, and bigly, to borrow a term from the present. Bigly. So Even outside of this work, this Ipseology work, I'm trying to live this credo to measure consistently, persistently, and precisely. And that's why I use Twitter bios, because they let you do those three things. Or they did until a billionaire got in the way. We'll see that happen too. So let's go back to this phrase, the essential elements of identity. This is one way of thinking about what people are. They're made up of elements of identity, just like real things are made up of elements. Elements combine in different ways. It's been useful to study those things. I think it's also will be useful to study these things in people. So the way that I do that is using Twitter bios, or it was until very recently using Twitter bios. Or abstractly, what I want are natural language responses. I want to see what people say when I ask them who they are. So we'll call this personally expressed identity text. What do people say when you ask them who they are? Then we'll use an open vocabulary approach here. Start with as few assumptions as possible and just look at the words that people use to describe themselves. So what can you do with that stuff? Jump right into some data. I'll get you oriented to this set of axes. You'll see it again. What I'm plotting here is time on the x-axis, so time moving from the past towards more recent time. And on the y-axis, this is prevalence. This is among US users of Twitter. If you're on Twitter today, right, this particular day, at what rate do people like that? Users on Twitter who tweeted that day, so we're going to say, I'm measuring people who tweeted each day. What is the rate that they use different phrases, words and phrases? These are the elements of identity, or they're standing in for the elements of identity. So they might describe themselves in their bios many different ways, as a mom, as a scientist. Here I'm focusing on a trend, an undeniable trend that people started adding pronoun lists to their bios. And a lot of people kept doing it for a while. So time on the x-axis, prevalence on the y-axis. I got used to looking at graphs like this during COVID. Maybe you did too. There were dashboards that I checked every day to see what was the prevalence of COVID cases in my county, in my state, in my country. So this is very similar. This is how the idea occurred to me. Looking at these dashboards daily, prevalence of COVID. This is prevalence of pronouns in the bio. Each one of these dots, this is where the precisely comes in, is a prevalence measured with 200,000 users. So about 200,000 US users of Twitter show up in my data each day, or they used to. For these days, you'd see about 200,000. So each one of these dots, and I didn't put the error bars on it because I've got a lot of precision in my estimate. Each dot, 200,000 is the denominator, and there's something else in the numerator. If it's a green dot, this is the number. That numerator would be the number of users that I see that have she/her in their bio. The red ones are he/him, and these orange ones are they/them. So you see what happens in the data. Almost nobody was doing this. It takes off. She, hers are more popular than he, hims. He, hims are more popular than they, thems. When I say popular, I just mean more people are doing it.
You might come back to this, but it looks like there's a dip sort of mid 2020. Is that George Floyd kind of racial? No, like but right after that.
Yeah.
There's kind of a dip. You can see mostly for the he, him, in the orange. I'm just wondering if that's because like racial, identity becomes more important than gender.
Steve sees COVID, there definitely was an increase in kind of liberal signaling identity signifiers in the bio right around George Floyd.
But it's like
It's not
not
gonna be a must.
limited to they, them, it's just being stripped from he, him, and she, her, which is interesting. It's not, they're not switching over, they're just eliminating the pronouns for the summer of 2020.
Well, one thing to say is that we'll get to longitudinal data later, where we're following the same individuals over time. What's happening here is cross-sectional data. Who's tweeting today? And you'll see that more clearly on the next slide. Who's tweeting today? Who's active today? And you also see, right, that population is churning a little bit, right? But a lot of them are the same people. So this is a mix, but what I'm graphing here is cross-sectionally today, you grab all tweet authors, at what rate do they use these pronoun lists in their bio? I thought you were going to point to this. This is the day that Kobe Bryant died in a helicopter crash. And a lot of people tweeted on that day who otherwise didn't, right? So they show up in the denominator, and they're not people who had she, her, or he, him in their bios. So a crazy, super active day, denominator went up. I call this a denominator effect. All right, so I think we're oriented to this type of graph, prevalence over time. Let me tell you one more thing about this. You can see the scale that's happening here. If you take 20,000 US words, 20,000 English words in US users, and you follow them year over year, and you say, at what rate are they added or deleted? The mean rate at which a word is added or deleted is 0. The adds and the deletes pretty much cancel out for any random word. The mean of that distribution is 0, right, where adds are positive and deletes are negative. But prevalence change over time, it could go up. These ones go up, could go down, so more to go down over time. See that later. But on average, identity signifiers, words and phrases like this, they change at a rate of +0 per year. And one standard deviation up from that is +3 per year. 2 standard deviations would be +6 per year. So this change is crazy, right? Is way out on the tail. Look, you're going from 0 to 400. Words typically don't change year over year. If they do, they change by single digits. These are not doing it. It's clear that this trend was in here just from reading bios, just from flashing through bios, saw this trend. What's cool about this, especially once you have daily data like this, is that you can zoom and enhance, just like on CSI, right? Zoom and enhance. This is just a subset of this data. Just looking at it a little bit more clearly. And remember, this is cross-sectional data. Who's tweeting on which days? If you have she, her in your bio, you tweet at a certain rate, an event happens, then I would say you're tweeting at an elevated rate, becoming a bigger proportion of what people see on Twitter. So that's that first arrow. This was when the Dobbs decision was leaked. It became clear that US Supreme Court was going to overturn Roe v. Wade. That is an event that got people with she, her, and he, him in their bio to tweet at a higher rate. And then when it was eventually released, became official, was in the news, you see another event where they're pulled up off of their baseline rate of tweeting. See for the day them there too. We can zoom and enhance a different part. This is a different part of the time series. Now I'm just looking at 1 month. This is January of 2021. Sure, right? This is January 2021. Yeah. And you see 2 events on this slide. might be familiar with them. Right on January 6th, people with he, hims, and she, hers tweeted more than baseline, more than they typically. And when else? So the attack on the US Capitol brought them out, and so did inauguration day. And we switched from Trump to Biden. They had something to say on that day. She, hers, and he, hims, and pulled off of the baseline rate, pulled up. So I think this stuff is really neat. We can do amazing work with this data that we can't do with traditional techniques that I'll tell you about in a minute. Just to get you more oriented to what I'm doing, I want personally expressed identity text where people themselves are talking about who they are and they're pushing this out into the world. They don't have the technology or the funding yet to crack open people's skulls, right? Or to sit in their bedrooms at 3 a.m. and see who they really are. Many people ask me, why don't you study true selves or who people really are? Without offering any way to do that is practical. This is very practical. You can look at how people describe themselves to a public audience. In their Twitter profile, they're prompted to describe themselves in 160 characters or less. And describe themselves in 160 characters or less, and I'll show you in a few slides. This is, to me, equivalent or not very far off of the way it's typically done in traditional social science approaches. So the advantage here is that 400 million people across the world for 10 plus years responded to this prompt. Describe yourself in 160 characters or less. Got this updated, some more, some less. Over 10 years, we can see when they make revisions. Show you that. And it's very similar to how we would have done it. We had had a traditional identity lab and used traditional methods. But this is what I'm working with. Twitter bios. 160 characters, people are describing themselves. They can edit it anytime they want. I want to show you this for just some face validity. What do you know about Al Yankovic? Well, he's weird. Or he wants you to think he is. Right? That's what you're going to get from his Twitter. What do you know about Tom Hanks? He's an actor. He says he's an actor. Malala, she's an advocate for girls. First 3 words on her bio. Interestingly, what do you know about Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson? Conservatives, right? They're Republican shills. They don't say Republican shill, right? They don't say conservative. They say something else. So I'm studying the choices people make, the language they use to describe themselves. Venus Williams is a tennis player. Danny DeVito is an actor. I think this is interesting. Christina Applegate is an actor too. She doesn't say actor. She talks about being a mom. Tom Brady's about football. I wonder if he still has family in his bio. I think that'd be interesting. All right, so I want to convince you briefly that this isn't as crazy as most people think it is. Right? Using Twitter bios to study human beings and who they are themselves. Because this is how you would do it if you were following the rules. You needed to do this in a way that would be approved by an august board of social scientists. You would use a who am I instrument. You ask people, who are you? Ask them to write it down. You'd have some undergraduates code those responses into 4 categories. A responses, B responses. I won't bore you with the details, but that is how it's typically done. Has been done. And one of these who am I instruments is called the 20 statements test, which I'll put in front of you right now. So I'll make you think about this for a minute. This is the 20 statements test. Used for decades to study human cells. People will argue, social scientists will argue about what it studies. It studies self-concept, self-attitudes, self-presentation. Different aspects of this, but this is the scale. Please write 20 answers to the simple question, who am I? The answers to yourself. It's a lie, right? Doing this as a test in a lab, a social science lab. So already you're distrustful of the person gathering the responses. But this is how it's done. 20 statements test. Answer 20 times, who am I? I don't see that as that different from describe yourself in 160 characters or less, which hundreds of millions of people were doing voluntarily in the real world with some sort of imagined audience, but publicly available profile. The other problem with using who am I instruments, right? Traditional methods of measure is they don't scale. You've got variable costs that don't go down. If you need one more participant, you need one more unit of dollars. So they don't scale, Twitter bio scale. And longitudinal administration is extremely different. You use a convenient sample of your students in your class this semester. And you gotta hunt them down in a year, or 5 years, or 10 years. Imagine the logistics of doing that, people just don't do it. So there is no longitudinal data for who am I measures, there just isn't. I will be the first to create longitudinal data this summer. So for the 20 statements test specifically, these are the 5 most frequently cited journal articles that use the 20 statements test. Do these people have data available? I haven't even bothered to ask for them, but my guess would be, given the year, no. They haven't saved it, or they wouldn't give it to you, but I don't know. I should give them the benefit of the doubt. Presumably, there's a file folder with these who am I responses sitting somewhere. But what the point I want to make with this slide, see the scientists studying tiny people, is that this is how it's done, right? This is traditional measures of self. These are the most cited journal articles that use the 20 statements test. I had a peer scientist ask me, why are they all college students? So the disciplinary difference, where the answer is you're computer scientists, you have budgets, right? These social scientists, their budget is $0, right? $0, that's your research budget. So they use convenience samples, college students. So this most cited article up here at the top, Rhea et al. I think it's cited frequently because it's multinational. By multinational, I mean they studied 2 groups of psych majors, 2 psych classes. One of them was in South Korea and one was in the United States. More specifically, it was one university in Seoul in South Korea and one university in New York City in the United States. So multinational means something, right? That's what it means with existing approaches, traditional data collection methods.
Do we find, is identity fluidity linked to education or income? Are more educated people more likely to have more fluid or less fluid identities?
Let's say that we don't know, because identity fluidity has never been measured because there's just not longitudinal data. I can answer that question for personality. And if you measure big 5 longitudinally, people do stabilize on the levels of their big 5. But this is not personality. It's bigger than personality, right? It's human selves, how you present yourself. All right, so but I won't belabor the point, right? You see the samples are small. They're just convenient samples. Whoever was in class this semester, again and again and again, even in 2020. All right, so I will belabor the point. I want to use large N samples. I want to use a consistent format, right? Another thing that you need to do as a social scientist is always innovate on the formula. So you don't use someone else's who am I instrument, you invent your own and collect data that way. So now it's not comparable to old data. I want to avoid that. I am now addicted to daily data. You've seen one of my graphs. With daily data, I'll tell you at the end of this talk how we're going to get data daily now that Twitter is not a reliable partner. Another thing that I think is useful, is good, is that writing a Twitter bio, editing it is a real world behavior, something that people do. And it's not answering 20 questions. I've already lied to you in the prompts, right? Write this as if I'm not gonna read it and study it for the next year. So the question is, what can we measure ipseologically? And the answer is everything, of course. Anything, everything. We'll start with a few of these. Right, so how about how important is religion versus politics to Americans? We can come at that very narrowly here and say over time, times on the x-axis here, what is the prevalence of these particular keywords within bios? This is 160 characters to describe yourself. But all of these people, Americans, are choosing someone else's name to talk about. Jesus, popular, but not stable. Trump, popular and getting ever more popular. There's a crossover there. I think it's important when you see this crossover. More people want to talk about Trump in their bio than want to talk about Jesus in their bio. Say those are just two words. The nice thing about the data is you can do this any way you get some group of religious words. And here I'm looking for explicit religious affiliations. People say they're Christian, Mormon, or Jewish, anything. Right? Religious affiliations, that's the green line. To me, when I look at this with very precise measurement, looks like it's stable. People talk about religion in their bio, but not at an increasing rate. How about politics? You can look at explicit political affiliations. They say they're Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal or progressive. Those kinds of words are in this blue line. It's trending up. Now, other ways to be political in your bio, if you say deplorable or BLM, right? It's not explicitly, you're not saying Republican, conservative, but you're talking about politics in your bio. That's the purple line here. People using other words in their bio. Talk about politics. Compared to things like sports. You might say basketball or soccer or volleyball in your bio. That's the red line for sports. Arts, say writer, photography, these kinds of things. And we call these art-related ones. So those are more popular and have always been more popular to appear within people's self-descriptions. But relative to politics, they're losing ground. And religion has already been in the words that people use to describe themselves. That's kind of big picture, long time frame. We can do this for smaller time frames. This is when Russia invaded Ukraine. Happened on this day. You can see before that day, almost no one had the Ukraine flag in their Twitter name or in their Twitter bio. Just after that day, you see incredible growth. The prevalence of Ukraine flags within people's Twitter bios, like this example. We're always counting people, right? So if you put the flag in for a time, you don't count for 4. You count as one person who had the flag in the bio. Count 4 times. This is something else that you can do with Ipseology. And right through what you can measure ipseologically, you can measure similarity to bios in the United States on any particular day. You can measure it 2 different ways. This slide is saying if you just throw a trend line on this, from where we started to where we finished, no matter how we measure the similarity of 2 randomly chosen Americans, their similarity of their bios, it's going down. Over time on Twitter, people are less alike than they used to be, than where they started out. This is another example, just like Ukraine, where things happen. You see the effect immediately in Twitter bots. And whether these identity signifiers exist in the bios of people tweeting on these days. This was a police shooting of an unarmed Black man, Philandro Castile. Happened in Houston or Dallas, a Texas city. You can see Black Lives Matter jumped up. BLM increased a little bit when George Floyd happened. You see Black Lives Matter lead, BLM followed. Quickly, we all knew what BLM stood for. You could just put BLM, you didn't have to spell it out. But at first you did have to spell it out. And these counter protests, backlash movements, like Back the Blue, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, they're there. We should keep their scale in context, the relative scale at which people are saying these things in their Twitter bots, becoming part of their identity. What else can we do? Beautiful thing about Twitter bios, another beautiful thing about Twitter bios is that they exist in a social network. People are connected to other people in many different ways. Here we're looking at follows. So if I follow you, Twitter says I am your friend. Among friends, if I have a bio with a pronoun list in it, then the rate at which my friends have pronouns is much higher. That's the pink distribution compared to the blue distribution. If I'm someone without pronouns in my bio, it's likely my friends don't have pronouns in their bio. If I'm someone with pronouns in the bio, I'm likely friends with people who have pronouns in their bio. More likely relative. Right, here's the mean, and we have the distributions nicely separated on both sides. This, sticking with pronouns in the bio, all of these graphs are the result of an REU funded by IACS. So thank you, IACS. Here we're saying what things go with he, him. That's on the x-axis. Which words go with she, her? That's on the y-axis. So in bios that contain he, him, these are things that frequently co-occur, right? So 0, there's 0. To the left, these are words that infrequently co-occur with he, him. So if you see an independent or crypto or Web3, you're unlikely to see he, him. If you see some guy, FTM, you are likely to see he, him. I love this graph because you've got the 4 quadrants. Here's a quadrant. These are words that don't occur with pronounless. You don't see them with he, him, or she, her. Official accounts, real estate, the metaverse, official Twitter feed, Christian. This makes sense to me. Football, right? If you're talking about these things, you're not using he, him, or she, her. That's the green quadrant. We've got these gendered quadrants here and here. So the she, hers specifically. And here are the he, hims. The he, him has dad, male, a man. she, her, gamer girl, cat lady, trans woman. Beautiful one is you can see fanboy and fangirl basically reflected around the identity line, the diagonal. Fanboy, fangirl. Very good. Fangirl. And this is interesting. I learned some things here. These are words that co-occur frequently, both with he, him, or she, her. Nobody has both of these in their bios. There's no bios with both he, him, and she, her. What's happening here is these are words that frequently co-occur with he, him, and also in other people's bios, frequently occur with she, her. So you get trans rights or human rights, you piece some of these things together. BLM, Black Lives Matter, intersectional, you're using the word intersectional. Intersectional, you probably also have pronouns in the bio. ACAB, all cops are bastards, right? This is a strong leftist signal. Maybe pronouns are a weak leftist signal. And TTRPGs. How many people know what TTRPG? I did not say, don't blame me. TTRPGs are tabletop role-playing games. So Dungeons and Dragons, but the wider space of tabletop role-playing games. If you're someone who enjoys, this is my theory, my speculation, who enjoys putting on other personas, pretending with your friends that you're someone other than you are, that you're someone more dramatic and heroic or creative and open enough to do role play, TTRPGs, then you're also someone who likes using pronouns in the Bible.
With 13 and 12, you know.
That's another way to say ACAB, not get in trouble.
Oh,
A is the first.
yeah.
13, 12. All right, I won't do it today, but you can go to my website, just search these things. So it's an interface that looks just like Google Trends. If you ever use Google Trends, type in a word and you see how popular is this search term over time. Same thing with identity trends. Do that. Encourage you to do it. You can search for emojis, phrases, all kinds of things.
I'm just kind of curious because we've got, as you mentioned, there's like two phenomenon going on because you're looking at how tweety people are. So I'm just thinking like if you've got, equal numbers of, I don't know, Steelers fans and Red Sox fans, like, if the Red Sox win the World Series, they're gonna be tweeting. And so it's gonna look like there was a big spike in Red Sox, but like the underlying population of Red Sox fans hasn't changed. It's just that's what they're talking about. So I don't know, do you have a sense for how much of this is just sort of fluctuations in the tweetiness of what people are, or who's tweeting, or how much is actually a shift in people, how they identify?
Yes, let me answer that by doing the next section.
Great, yeah.
here, right? Because I've been pretty much just talking about population change, right? Showing you, let's pretend we don't know anything and just look at how populations are changing over time with this churning population. Some people are creating accounts, some people died and they're never going to post again, right? We have these churning populations. We can look at populations over time, and we do that many, many times in social science, but frequently we want to zoom in to the individual and say, how's this person changing over time? So yes, you can do that. Here's me changing over time. You can see I filled in the beard from the goatee. I added a graph to the background. I stayed a computational social scientist, but I edited this out. Right? This got me in trouble because students took this seriously. I said, I solved the world's problems by data mining social media. And students ask me, how do you do that? How do you solve? I tell them, that's a joke, right? This is irony. And sarcasm doesn't work in Twitter bios, right? I don't solve the world's problem. I study the human condition, right? This is a better way of saying it. So I'm not alone. Lots of people edit their Twitter bio. We can see this happening over time. Every time we get a snapshot of someone's Twitter profile, we have their user ID, which uniquely identifies them. So we can link together all of the snapshots every time we've ever observed a Twitter profile, and we can say, these are the same people over time. And we can look at how they are changing their bios. So here, I'll show you counts of add events and delete events. Add events are in the strong line. Delete events are the weak line, right? This alpha line. For 4 different identity signifiers. Sorry, that is US politics again. This is my students. They love US politics. They only want to talk about US politics. I'd like to talk about sports. Maybe Heather and I will do the sports bios project. But add events are when you didn't have the word Trump in your bio, and the next year I see you, you do. So here are year-over-year longitudinal results. Think of these like, if you're in the restaurant business, you look at same store year-over-year sales. You need to compare apples to apples. So this McDonald's in this location, it sold so many fries in 2012 and so many in 2023. You can compare those and have a good comparison. So year over year, when we see the same person in 2 different years, what are they doing to their bio? Well, for several years, they were adding MAGA and Trump. After the election of 2020, more of them were deleting it than removing it. For a while, that changed. QAnon, and this is a QAnon slogan, where we go one, we go all. We're never as popular, right? They got lots and lots of media coverage, especially their activities on Twitter. Never as popular. Look at the scale here. Never as popular as kind of mainstream identity signifiers like MAGA and Trump. And it all ended when they got deplatformed in the summer of 2020. They're not dealing with QAnon anymore. You can't be QAnon on the platform. And they just went away. Okay. All right, you can look at this daily, right? Day by day by day. How many people are adding MAGA or deleting MAGA? More people were adding MAGA up until this is the election in 2020. First orange line is the election in 2020. Now more people are deleting it than adding it. The red line goes above the green line. And this line is, second line is January 6th. So some people will tell you after January 6th, people disassociated with the Trump brand. It started when he lost the election. People who lived in reality started disassociating. They were deleting more than adding. And this is really cool. This is where we're at with this project. We're saying which words, and we've got 20,000 words. This is the distribution of words, and I've just pulled out some of them. Which words are going to predict that you add MAGA? This was in 2018, so before all of the other stuff. In 2018, are you going to add MAGA to your bio? People who had Tea Party in their bio already, yeah, they were going to add MAGA. So they had an extreme risk. This is a risk ratio. They had an extreme risk that they were going to add MAGA to their bio. In their bio, if they said back the blue, or they were talking about taxes or prayer, they're much more likely than the typical person to add MAGA to their bio. So these are predictive words. You know, I don't like to use the medical literature, but there's a medical technique. These are risk factors, right? This is like eating too many cheeseburgers is a risk factor for heart disease. These are risk factors for adding MAGA. These are protective factors. If you have Black Lives Matter in your bio, you're not going to add the word MAGA to your bio. If you're an official site, if you're into games, and sports is right on this midline here. That's interesting. And so we can order all English words, right? From protective factor to risk factor. But now we have to make a paper out of that. And I just want to throw the data up there. But we're trying to make a paper out of this stuff. Here's another, this is longitudinal now. We were looking cross-sectionally before. How populations become less similar over time, or do they become less similar over time? This is smoother, right? You are less yourself today than you were yesterday, or you're less your yesterday self today than you were yesterday. In 2012, everyone has 100% similarity to their 2012 self. And then you get these nice decay curves. We had to give linear estimates because we do social science, but look at the data in the blue line, right? You're decaying away from your best self. each subsequent year, you're less likely to wear 2012. I think that's true in general, and it's absolutely true in Twitter day. What about the future? I have a few minutes to talk about the future. One thing that I might get back to someday is jumping on the AI train, doing AI to predict future selves. And if I give you my Twitter bio today, when I first proposed this was 2020, I could train on a lot of this. Right? I've got your 2015 bio and I've got your 2020 bio. Let AI learn what is the translation, right? It's very good at translating from French to English. What if it could just translate from you 5 years ago to you today? Could I train it on this and get it to do this? I proposed this 2025 was some crazy year in the future. But I tried many, many times to get this funded and haven't gotten it funded. So this is on the shelf. I think it's a cool idea, but on the shelf. I don't know if people would be offended by this or not. I think it'd be fun to look at the mistakes that AI uses. It's just going to throw pronouns in everyone's bio, throw BLM in everyone's bio, those kinds of things. But this is something you can find in the book. The next stage for this is taking it global. You probably noticed most of the results that are published are in the United States, but we got the data for the whole world from the very beginning. Right? It's a 1% sample of all tweets. So if anyone, anywhere in the world tweeted, there was a 1% chance it ends up in the data set. It's still sitting in the data set on Seawolf today. So we can go back in time across the world and look at how people changed. Across these English-speaking countries, a lot of people added vegan to their bios. Seems like it was displacing vegetarian. And there's this kind of late reaction in some places that people needed to specify that they were carnivore.
Can I ask a question? So I would imagine that people are often using these tags, particularly in cases where that label is rare. So I'm thinking this is like, as ecologists, we think about mimicry, and then you have a mimic and that works because there aren't many mimics. And then if the proportion of mimics grows, then the whole mimicry doesn't work. So I'm just wondering like whether you would see a decline at the point at which like if vegetarianism becomes more the norm, it no longer even makes sense to identify yourself as vegetarian. So you drop it because it's sort of, it just fades into the background.
Yeah, I think that will absolutely be true. And I think we could study that in a lot of different cases, a lot of different case studies here where you have some neologism, right? That all of a sudden we're describing ourselves this way. And then for one reason or another, you're saying it just becomes less distinct and it feels weird to say it out loud.
Yeah,
right?
you're like,
And
well, who cares that you're vegetarian?
Yeah.
Right? Suddenly everyone's a vegetarian. So I'm just wondering, like, it would look like there were fewer vegetarians, but actually it's because there's so many vegetarians.
yeah, I would love to see this locally, right? Is it if my local neighborhood, people I'm seeing tweets from, everybody's saying they're vegetarian, maybe that's the reason why I'm dropping, right? Not that I'm transitioning to become vegan, right? And we can look at those transitions. Maybe delete this word and you add this word in its place. We're doing some of that. We could do that here.
It's like the joke, you know, how can you tell a vegan? Oh, don't worry, they'll tell you.
It's true in Twitter bios, right? They'll tell you. Increasingly. The world of soccer, it's what the black bars are telling you here, right? So this is just an illustration using sports to show we can do cool stuff around the world, especially if the signifiers, as identity signifiers we want to look at, are emojis. This is nice because we can forget about the language differences across, you know, the dozen languages across these 30-something countries, and just look at emojis. And I see a lot of face validity here. Who likes American football? Well, Americans. And, you know, our North American neighbors. But most countries like football, soccer. Enough to put it in their Twitter bio. Tiny bits of golf. And cricket in the places that you'd imagine. Pakistan and India and the UK. So what are we gonna do? I don't have access to tweets anymore. The streaming API, they gave me 1% of all tweets, it's gone. You have to negotiate directly with Elon if you want. And I haven't tried it. I said, this is me, this is a AI, I said, poor scientists begging and cruel billionaire standing over and laughing. We've got a pretty good.
I'm surprised you just didn't get Elon Musk's face there, like the AI didn't just reproduce.
I should have used Grok, right? Grok would have done it, right? But yeah, I used some free API generator. This is a felony. So what are we gonna do? This is what I'm gonna do. In the short term, I don't have Twitter data anymore. I can pay for just tiny drips and drabs compared to what I was used to getting. I'm not gonna pay for it. Instead, uses money to survey people. We can go back to traditional methods. Right? So in the summer of 2024, I gave people the 20 statements test, 600 Americans, and this was a representative sample of Americans. I think it's the first time that's ever happened, right? Representative sample of Americans, 600 of them. I'll come back to them, those same 600 this summer. Ask them to describe themselves again, and we'll have the first longitudinal 20-step statements test data since it was invented 7 decades ago. And then I'm a little bit more excited about this, right? I need daily data. I just developed an addiction to daily data. Imagine we just ask these simple questions. Does this identity signifier describe you today? Does football fan describe you today? Does mom describe you today? I think these are easy questions to answer. You can answer a lot of them quickly. And that's what I'll be collecting, all right? I have been collecting since December, asking dozens of people, Americans every day, hundreds of these. Does this describe you today? Does this describe you today? I'm happy to report that so far, 100% of people have said that human describes them today. About 80% of Americans are happy. It'll be fun to look at, right, when the administrations change, do we see Democrats get less happy, Republicans get more happy? So that data is in the works. And I've done something similar for AI support. I ask people, do you support further development of artificial intelligence? Every single day for more than a year, I've asked them that, and you can see the results here. Now I'm just adapting that pipeline for the BIOS work for signifiers. So here's the summary. I won't read it to you, but I hope I've convinced you, you can use Twitter bios to figure out what people are like, to look at that over time. There's a whole lot more to do. This is just an introduction, right? The book is meant to be an introduction to very interested grad students, get them jump started towards doing this kind of work. You can pick up a free copy here on your way out. You can read it for free on the web, and don't miss the last page on the book. You can find a picture of Zookeeper.
Jason,
Not the slides, but there's Zoom.
I'm just wondering whether, it would seem maybe another way of getting at some of these same ideas would be to take like toll booth photographs of cars, like license plates, to pull out the bumper stickers, because it has the same idea of like you proactively took the time to identify yourself to the public in this way.
Yeah, you know, I haven't gone more than thinking, hey, that's a good idea. In political science, there is this metric called the yard sign differential, where people have proposed and proved with very shoddy data many decades ago that you just drive around and count how many yard signs say Trump and how many say Hillary, you'll get a lot better data than polls, right? I don't think that was ever true, right? But it was one way to do it. I would love to have had data. People have dash cams now, right? They just drive around. Everything they drive past is publicly visible. There shouldn't be any IRB problems at all, right? It's just things you can see from a public street, which are not even human subjects data. So,
But those toll booths, so they are taking pictures of the license plate, so it's like a very readable,
yeah, so you're saying
terms of
New York
AI,
State, right? I
you
don't have to, yeah,
Right.
go to a company. I could go to New York State.
and it's very standardized in terms of the focal distance, so in terms of
Right.
AI, because
Yeah.
license plates, I mean, I should say bumper stickers are interesting because there's a certain amount of longitude, like, they stick over time. Like I still have my Obama 08 sticker on my car. So it's like, you could look at change in that way in terms of you kind of might have a sense for when a sticker came out.
Yeah.
But
That's a great idea, because you could get a bunch of images, standard OCR, right, get the words out of them, yeah.
yeah, match them to, yeah.
First sticker, Ipseology, I don't know, I'll think about it, thank you.
Hi, I'm just interested in how you understand Twitter as a rhetorical space. So when I was watching this, I mean, we're providing rhetoric, right? So we're thinking about this in a way that that Twitter is a very particular place to make an identity claim. So in that way, like, it's very different than asking your identity test, or very different from a license plate, because you're also speaking to a group of people who are going to evolve over time too. So how I might identify myself, if I identify myself by my work position, for example, and then I find out that most of my followers are actually from my local high school, I'm going to change and potentially evolve in response to those people, right? So it's who's responding and posting to me, who I'm liking. It's sort of the engagement that's driving the bio to a large degree. So I'm wondering how, like, you think about the engagement piece as part of this story, or maybe it's not that relevant.
So how much I've thought about it, very little.
Yeah.
I haven't studied it yet, but the potential's there. I mean, I want to go deeper. You've seen
Yeah.
how high level these now.
Like your examples are particularly interesting, like the Obama, the fact that he identifies himself as a dad first, that
Right.
isn't necessarily a genuine claim, it's a
Right.
rhetorical claim, right? Like
Right,
it's a
exactly.
positioning moment. So thinking about the ways that people access wide audiences in the desire for engagement, that's performative. So,
Yeah, I want to be able to study that deeper, right? And you've seen me scratch the surface a little bit to say, we can at least show in the social network that having pronouns in the bio clusters, right? Which you probably would have guessed before you looked at the data, right? But we can see that things cluster. That's with a snapshot. More labor hours, right? The data exists that we can see this evolve over time, right? So who do I follow when I'm adding pronouns to my bio? Does it look like it comes out of the blue? For some people, it must be early and come out of the blue, but for later people, it's when they've reached a certain threshold, right? More than half of the people I interact with already have pronouns in the bio. Seems like something we're doing these days, I'm gonna do it. And yeah. More to your point, this is how people are describing themselves to a public global audience.
and to attract,
The whole
right?
context collapse here. Yeah, to attract followers. I think that's a useful way to look at data, is that people are doing this strategically. There must be some signifiers, you add them and you lose followers, you lose engagement. There are some signifiers, you add them and you gain followers and engagement. We can look at that over time too, see what people are doing strategically.
It would be
Just
really
haven't
interesting to
yet.
see different rhetorical spaces, like to see what those same Twitter bios, for example, what they would look like in other places, like license plates or something like that. In other words, if a claim is present in multiple bios,
Yeah,
in
And that's-
multiple rhetorical spaces, it somehow is a more genuine claim. I would
that's
say.
the absolute dream, but
Yeah, I don't know what.
with
the-
enough funding, right, we could go to people and say, if you're comfortable, give us your Twitter bio, and now we've got 10+ years of history of how you described yourself on Twitter and how would you describe yourself today?
Right.
And can you look at these old bios and say how much of this, was true or applied to you, right? It'd be great too. But what I don't have is side to sides. I just don't have the data yet.
Right, and I don't have a suggestion, so.
Someday we will.
How many people are actually changing their bios regularly?
Enough, right? So in the set of US users that you see often enough to get longitudinal data from, it works out nicely that the median days between revisions is about 360. So it's about once a year. I don't think people are, have it on their calendar, like once a year, I gotta update my Twitter bio. But if you take everybody you've got and you say, what are the how many days between revisions have I seen, and then take the median of that distribution, that's about, it's somewhere around 360. So I can say, for US users, tweet often enough, it's about a year, about once a year. And per number of users, you see about 200,000 unique US users per year, you see about 10 million unique users per, 200,000 per day, 10 million per year. And so about half of them, you're gonna see a revision, some sort.
And have you looked at sentiment analysis on the Twitter bios?
Not yet, it's become unfashionable in my circles, right? It just feels too easy, I'm just counting squares, counting goods versus bads. We haven't looked at sentiment.
I was curious, like, when was the last time you got the access on Twitter?
June 2023 is when everything shut down.
June 2023. June 2023. Because I just curious, like, how Twitter became X, how it might affect like
It's
population.
in there, right? So the first few months of it being X, and there's plenty of data post Elon acquisition to look at. I won't keep the group any longer, but if you want to talk to me, I'm happy to take a book before you leave. You can always email me.
Thank you.
Thanks.